A woman stands in her kitchen at 11:47 p.m., frozen in that kind of silence that feels like it's pressing on your chest. The fluorescent light above her flickers with that tired, uneven pulse, like even the house is exhausted. Dishes pile in the sink. Laundry sits unfolded on a chair she hasn't touched all day. Her kid is knocked out on the couch because she couldn't manage bedtime tonight. And when her phone buzzes, it's never good. Overdue bills, unread messages, reminders of choices she made thinking they would set her free. She slides down to sit on the cold floor, back against the cabinet, hands shaking, not because life is cruel, but because for the first time in a long time, life is loudly, undeniably real, and she doesn't have a single clue how to keep it from swallowing her. Freeze that frame. Because what comes next, it's the part almost nobody wants to talk about. This woman, like so many modern women, grew up believing that independence was the ultimate form of liberation, that avoiding structure was empowerment, that doing life entirely on her own would somehow unlock a happier, freer version of herself. But everything in her worldview shifts the moment she meets a certain kind of man. Not the flexible boyfriend she could emotionally outmaneuver, not the apologetic partner who folded just to keep her calm, not the guy who tolerated disrespect because he was terrified of losing her. No, she meets a man rooted in reality, a man she can't manipulate, a man whose boundaries stay still even when her emotions don't, a man who doesn't need her validation to feel like a complete human being. And in an instant, everything she's been taught collapses. Because modern women can handle soft men they can push, shape, overwhelm, or control. But a grounded, stable man, a man with a spine, a man who has standards, that's a collision with the truth she never prepared for. Now zoom out of that kitchen, like a drone rising over a city full of quiet, unresolved stories. Because this isn't just about her. This is the story of an entire generation raised to believe feelings outrank facts, that discomfort equals oppression, that consequences are cruelty, that accountability is optional, and that men should bend, soften, shrink, compromise, and serve. Then they meet a man who doesn't play by those rules, a man who doesn't flinch when she cries, who doesn't retreat when she gets angry, who doesn't apologize for things he didn't do, who doesn't collapse just because she's having a bad day. A man who isn't impressed by her independent aesthetic. A man who refuses to compete with her ego. And suddenly it feels like she's waking up from a warm dream into cold daylight. Everything sharpens. Everything feels heavier. Because real men don't negotiate with dysfunction. They don't pick up the pieces she breaks on purpose. They don't finance chaos. They don't play therapist for emotional spirals. They don't reward irresponsibility with attention. They live in cause and effect, not fantasy and entitlement. And that's when the panic begins. Not because he mistreated her, but because she can't handle the experience of a man who sees straight through her performance. He doesn't see the curated persona, the victim mask, or the emotional theatrics. He sees her, the woman beneath everything she hides behind, and that level of visibility terrifies her. So she flips the narrative in self-defense. He's controlling, he's cold, he's emotionally unavailable, he's toxic, he's bad for my mental health. Not because he is, but because he's the first man she couldn't bend. This is the core of the problem. Modern women don't struggle with real men because real men are harsh. They struggle because real men remove the illusions they depend on. And without the illusions, they don't have much to fall back on. Because when a woman like this meets a grounded, unshakable man, something inside her starts to pant. It's that quiet internal scrambling that says, my usual tools aren't working. And she hates that feeling. She's used to men who flinch, men who melt, men who apologize just to calm her down, men who orbit around her emotions like they're the center of the universe. But real men, they stand there like mountains, unmoved, unshaken, uninterested in drama. And that stillness, it exposes everything she's been running from. So she starts talking faster, over-explaining, trying to impress him with accomplishments and slogans and independence quotes, anything to regain control of the dynamic. But he's not trying to win her. He's evaluating her, observing her patterns with the calm of someone who's seen too many lives collapse under the exact habits she's trying to hide. And here's what truly rattles her. He sees the difference between confidence and chaos, between independence and avoidance, between strength and stubbornness, between empowerment and entitlement. Most men blur these lines because they're terrified of losing access to her. But real men, they don't chase validation. They don't beg to be chosen. They've built something solid inside themselves, and that exposes everything she hasn't built. So she switches strategies. She tests him. A sarcastic comment, a boundary push, a delayed reply, a small disrespect wrapped in a joke. She needs to see if he bends. She needs proof that she can still control the narrative. But when he doesn't budge, when he remains calm and unbothered, it hits her. She feels small. Not because he made her feel small, but because her identity relied on men crumbling around her. And when he doesn't crumble, her entire framework cracks. That's why modern women use lines like, "He's too intense, he's too serious, he intimidates me, he makes me feel judged, he's emotionally unavailable." These women aren't describing him, they're describing the discomfort of being seen clearly. Because a man with boundaries feels like rejection. A man with standards feels like pressure. A man who speaks plainly feels like criticism. A man who isn't controlled feels like danger, not to her safety, but to her ego. Real men don't orbit around her emotions. They don't shrink so she can feel big. They don't compromise their masculinity for her comfort. They stand in their truth, and they expect her to stand in hers. And that expectation alone can send her spiraling. Because once she realizes she can't out-argue him, can't manipulate his calm, can't destabilize his direction, she comes face to face with the truth she never prepared for. She doesn't know how to be with a man she can't control.
And this, right here, is where the real unraveling begins. Not in shouting, not in fighting, not in dramatic movie-style explosions. It begins quietly, inside her, in the realization that she is completely unprepared for a relationship rooted in reality instead of emotion. Because once she understands that this man operates on a frequency she's never encountered, her instincts kick into overdrive. Not feminine instinct, not intuition, survival. For the first time in a long time, she isn't the one setting the emotional temperature. She isn't dictating the pace. She isn't controlling the dynamic with moods, silence, tears, drama, or intensity. A real man creates a different emotional climate, one built on clarity, direction, steadiness, and boundaries. And clarity is the one environment modern women were never trained to function in. Watch her closely. The shift is almost physical. Her confidence starts to feel like a costume. Her independence starts to feel like isolation. Her "I don't need anyone" energy starts to feel like an empty room. She becomes hyper-aware of her own flaws, suddenly self-conscious, suddenly unsure, suddenly aware of every habit she's been hiding from. And here's the part almost no one sees. Most modern women aren't afraid of rejection. They're afraid of exposure. Exposure to what? Exposure to the unpaid bills beneath the curated lifestyle, The emotional instability under the strong woman brand, the lack of discipline behind her independence, the chaos behind her confidence, the insecurity behind her bravado. A real man sees through her image the way a surgeon sees through skin, calmly, cleanly, without flinching. And she has no idea how to handle being seen like that. So what does she do next? She tries to drag him into her world. She tries to spark emotion in him, pushes his buttons, questions his past, mocks his masculinity, raises her voice, withdraws affection, creates jealousy, tests, pokes, provokes, anything to make him crack. Because if she can make him reactive, if she can make him emotional, if she can make him bend or panic or chase, then she can return to the emotional battlefield where she always wins. But real men don't enter arenas built to trap them. Real men stay on the mountain, and from the mountain, every tantrum looks tiny. This is where modern women feel the threat most intensely, because they realize something deeply uncomfortable. They have no power over him. Her strongest weapons, emotion, guilt, blame, victimhood, don't work on him, because he's not trying to save her. He's not trying to fix her. He's not trying to protect her from her own dysfunction. He sees it, he notes it, but he doesn't absorb it. And that terrifies her. Because if he's not swayed by pity, guilt, validation, or fear, then he's immune to her control. And nothing scares a modern woman more than losing control. This is when she starts rewriting the narrative. He's too calm. He's too logical. He doesn't validate my feelings enough. He doesn't chase me. He doesn't need me. But underneath all of that, there's one sentence she will never say out loud. I don't know how to be with a man who lives in reality. She knows how to handle emotional men, chaotic men, needy men, weak men, men who fold, men who crumble, men who fear losing her. But a man who fears nothing? A man who can walk away without hesitation? A man who values peace more than access to her body? A man who prioritizes purpose over pleasing her? That's a threat, not to her physical safety, but to her story. Because real men don't play along with the fantasy version of relationships she grew up with. Real men don't reward chaos. Real men don't mistake drama for depth. Real men don't call instability passion. Real men don't treat emotional spirals like sacred expressions. Real men bring truth into the room. And truth feels like violence to someone who built her identity on being right, adored, validated, and emotionally centered. So what does she do? She calls him toxic. She calls him emotionally unavailable. She calls him too masculine, too strict, too controlled, too confident, too real. Because it's easier to demonize the man who exposed her weak spots than confront the weak spots themselves. And this is the slow motion tragedy. She wants a real man. She genuinely does. But she isn't built for one. Not yet. Not with her habits, not with her ego, not with her emotional skill set, not with her lack of discipline. She wants his strength, but not the accountability that comes with it. She wants his presence, but not the consistency required to keep it. She wants his loyalty, but not the behavior that earns it. She wants his leadership, but not the humility that matches it. And when she realizes she can't rise to his level, she tries to drag him down to hers. But real men don't descend. They don't play in the mud. They don't argue in circles. They don't validate dysfunction. They don't coddle ego. They stand where they are, solid, focused, unmoved. And that's when she finally realizes the truth. He wasn't too much for her. She was unprepared for him. And the moment that sinks in, her entire emotional structure shakes. Because once a modern woman realizes she can't pull a real man down, she starts to feel the weight of what it would take to rise up. And rising up is heavy. It requires discipline, consistency, humility, emotional regulation, self-awareness, softening without collapsing, strength without aggression. All the muscles she never trained. This is when she enters the cycle millions of women fall into. The first phase is self-doubt. She feels overwhelmed around him. She can't control her emotions. She feels exposed in his presence. She starts defaulting to arguments, tears, shutdowns. She fears losing him more than she fears losing herself. But she can't admit she's in her head. So she moves to the next phase, resentment. She resents the very qualities she admired at first. His steadiness feels cold. His boundaries feel controlling. His clarity feels harsh. His discipline feels restrictive. Him refusing to tolerate chaos feels judgmental. She blames him for the standards she can't meet, blames him for the emotional storms he won't indulge, blames him for not morphing into the easy, pliable man she's used to. Because blaming him is easier than admitting she's not ready for the man she said she wanted. Then comes the final phase, retreat. She pulls away, starts arguments out of thin air, rewrites him as the villain, runs back to environments where she feels powerful again, friends who validate her stories, men who worship instead of evaluate, spaces where accountability doesn't exist. Anything to escape the pressure to grow. Because real men demand the one thing she was never trained to give, reality. Not narratives, not tantrums, not emotional ransom notes. Reality. And reality requires responsibility. Responsibility for her choices, her habits, her patterns, her behavior. So she leaves. Not because he hurt her, but because he revealed her. And nothing terrifies the modern woman more than being seen without filters.
But here's the twist, the part she never saw coming, the part that hits years later when the dust settles. Once she walks away from a real man, she spends the rest of her dating life trying to replace what she lost, and failing every single time. She tries softer men. They bore her. She tries chaotic men. They drain her. She tries weaker men. She loses respect. She tries emotionally unstable men. She ends up collapsing right alongside them. Because no one replicates what that one man brought into her life. That balance, that structure, that unwavering calm, that sense of direction, that emotional leadership, that stability she didn't even realize she needed until it was gone. A real man gives a woman a kind of clarity she feels for years, a kind of safety that ruins her appetite for chaos forever, a kind of peace that makes dysfunction unbearable. And that's when it finally hits her, not in a dramatic moment, not in a midnight epiphany, but slowly, over months, over failed relationships, over nights she can't sleep. She wasn't overwhelmed because he was too much. She was overwhelmed because he was the first man who required her to become more disciplined, more self-aware, more emotionally mature, more responsible for her own storms, more accountable for her own actions, more honest with herself. And nothing in modern conditioning prepares women for that. Modern conditioning teaches women to blame, not to grow, to externalize, not to reflect, to demand, not to build, to feel empowered, but never to be challenged. So instead of rising, she collapses. Instead of learning, she spirals. Instead of evolving, she resents. Because a real man exposes everything she avoids. The emotional fragility hidden beneath the tough exterior, the entitlement wrapped in self-love slogans, the lack of structure behind her independence, the absence of discipline behind her lifestyle, the need for validation disguised as confidence, the fantasy of growth without effort. And once she sees those things,
The real things, she can't unsee them. Some women rise from that moment, most don't. But the men watching this, men who relate to this story, you need to understand something clearly. Modern women don't struggle with real men because real men are harsh. They struggle because real men require real women. Not perfect women, not submissive women, not emotionless women, not women who stay quiet. Real women, women who can regulate their emotions, women who can handle responsibility, women who communicate instead of destroy, women who can stand beside a man, not compete with him, women who bring peace, not panic, and women who understand that love is something you build, not something you perform. Women who know that relationships come with requirements, not just benefits. Because until a modern woman relearns the skills her grandmother's generation mastered intuitively, resilience, cooperation, self-control, emotional stability, accountability, respect, she will keep collapsing in the presence of the very men she claims to desire. Because the truth is simple. Real men don't break modern women. Reality does. Real men just stop protecting them from reality. And that, right there, is why modern women can't handle emotionally grounded, self-led, real-life men. Because a real man doesn't try to be her world. He reveals the world she's been shielded from. He shows her the difference between fantasy and adulthood. He exposes the gap between who she imagines herself to be and who she actually is. And the world? It reveals the woman she never became. But here's the part no one talks about. Some women do rise. After the confusion, after the panic, after the retreat, after the resentment, after the uncomfortable truths. Some women hit that emotional rock bottom and finally decide, I don't want to run from myself anymore. These are the women who return to discipline, who relearn patience, who build emotional strength, who practice accountability without crumbling, who stop weaponizing their feelings, who stop demanding softness from men while offering sharpness in return, who stop seeing standards as attacks, who stop competing with men and start partnering with them. These are the women who grow into the kind of partners real men actually build with, the kind of women who rise instead of retreat, the kind of women who meet strength with strength, not fear. And when a woman reaches that stage, when she actually becomes someone solid, steady, self-aware, and grounded, she realizes something powerful. A real man wasn't dangerous. He was a mirror. And mirrors don't harm you. They reveal you. The part that hurt wasn't him. It was the truth she wasn't ready to face. Because a real man isn't intimidating. Your lack of preparation is. A real man isn't too much. Your foundation is. A real man isn't cold. Your inability to regulate your emotions is. A real man isn't controlling. Your resistance to accountability is. A real man isn't judgmental. Your subconscious guilt is. A real man isn't toxic. Your unhealed patterns are. And when she grows into the woman she was meant to be, when she builds discipline, stability, self-respect, emotional maturity, she sees things clearly. He wasn't the threat. Her ego was. He wasn't the instability. Her habits were. He wasn't the villain. Her avoidance was. And that's the final revelation. Real men aren't too much for modern women. Modern conditioning is too little for real relationships. Because real relationships require structure, effort, honesty, ownership, growth, consistency, restraint, direction, cooperation, traits that both men and women must cultivate. And in the end, here's the truth that echoes long after she's walked away. A real man doesn't require perfection, he requires partnership. Not a performance, not ego battles, not chaos, just partnership. And until she becomes a partner instead of a performer, she will keep losing the men she wasn't ready for. Because real men don't destroy modern women, They simply stop cushioning the consequences. And the moment a woman meets a man grounded in reality, that reality doesn't just reveal him, it reveals her.